When my mother passed away last spring, it fell on me to sort through her things. My two sisters had moved out west years ago, and neither had the time nor the heart to come back to Connecticut for anything more than the funeral. So it was just me, sitting in a house full of dust and memories. The place hadn't changed much since I was a kid. Same yellow wallpaper in the hallway, same faint smell of old wood and laundry detergent. I remember thinking how strange it was, how a home could feel both familiar and alien at the same time. I started in the attic. Mom always kept everything. Old clothes, newspaper clippings, report cards from the 80s. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, maybe some clue as to why she'd never talked much about my dad. He vanished in 1978, when I was just 2 years old. Officially, he was listed as missing. No accident, no body, no real explanation. One day he went to work and never came home. No calls, no sightings, nothing. We grew up without speaking much about it. Mom would just say, "Your father loved you very much," and change the subject. For a long time, I accepted that. But after her death, I found myself needing answers. Maybe it was grief. Maybe just curiosity, 30 years overdue. I was halfway through clearing out the attic when I stumbled on a box. Not a big one, just a small wooden chest, the kind you'd expect to hold old photographs or jewelry. It was tucked behind an old trunk of winter coats, sealed with a strip of brittle masking tape. In faded ink, written almost like an afterthought, were the words, "For Adam. When the time is right." I just stood there for a moment, the dust swirling in the sunlight from the attic window. My heart thudded in my chest. I recognized the handwriting. It was my dad's. I had seen it before in old birthday cards and a single half-filled baby book. I brought the box down carefully and set it on the kitchen table. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled the tape back. Inside, wrapped in a yellowed piece of linen, was a single envelope. My name was on the front. I held it for a while. I don't know why. Something about it felt heavier than paper had any right to be. When I finally opened it, I expected a few lines, maybe an apology, not 8 full pages written in hurried, cramped handwriting. The first sentence stopped me cold. "If you're reading this, I've been gone a long time. I didn't leave because I wanted to." That was how it began. 8 pages of words that cracked open a part of me I didn't even know was still closed. He spoke like a man on borrowed time, urgent, fearful, yet heartbreakingly tender. He said he had discovered something at work, something that he wasn't supposed to know. He didn't name names, didn't say what it was exactly. Only that it was big, dangerous, and that people were watching him. He feared for his life, and for ours. He wrote about the night before he vanished, how he'd planned to leave town quietly, but realized he might never come back. He couldn't risk telling my mom, not directly. He feared she'd try to follow him or call the police. He didn't trust anyone. "If they knew I left a trail," he wrote, "you and your mother might end up just like me." I must have read the letter 5 times in a row, each time picking up some small nuance I'd missed. It didn't sound paranoid, not exactly. More like someone forced into a corner. Someone scared enough to disappear from his own life, but desperate enough to leave behind a piece of the truth. At the very bottom of the letter was a final line, scrawled differently than the rest. Less controlled, maybe written in a rush. "Start with the green file in the garage, behind the old workbench." I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands, heart pounding. I hadn't even thought about the garage. It had been locked for years. Mom said the door was jammed, and I never questioned it. Now, I had a reason to pry it open. I had a reason to believe my father might not have just disappeared. He might have been erased. The garage door didn't give in easily. It took me nearly 20 minutes with a crowbar, working around rusted hinges and old wood swollen from years of humidity. When it finally creaked open, it was like opening a tomb. The air was thick with dust and motor oil, and the faint scent of mold clung to everything. The light switch didn't work, of course. I found an old flashlight in one of Mom's kitchen drawers and made my way inside, stepping over piles of boxes, garden tools, and what looked like an old lawnmower that hadn't run since the Clinton administration. Behind the workbench, just like the letter said, was a metal filing cabinet. The bottom drawer was jammed. I knelt down, wedged the flashlight between my neck and shoulder, and tugged with both hands until it finally gave way with a shriek of metal. A small cloud of dust shot out, making me cough. And there it was, a single folder. Green, just like my father had written. It was thick, stuffed with papers, clippings, and photographs. No label on the outside. Nothing to indicate what it was. I sat down right there on the cold garage floor and opened it. The first thing that caught my eye was a black and white photograph. It showed my dad, younger than I'd ever seen him, standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. His expression was tense, mid-step, like he'd been caught off guard by the camera. In the background, there was a sign partially visible, Blackwell Research Group. I'd never heard of it. Next were documents, memos, typewritten pages, handwritten notes in the margins. Some were technical. Others read like surveillance logs. Dates, times, descriptions of meetings. Most were dry, confusing, or full of acronyms I didn't understand. But one thing became clear as I kept reading. My father had been involved in something secret. Something he wasn't supposed to know about, or at least, wasn't supposed to document. One page stood out. It was a memo marked, confidential, with a date, June 17, 1978, just 3 days before he disappeared. It mentioned a meeting with a man only referred to as R. No location, no details, just the words. Subject growing concerned. Believes internal breach possible. Preparing documentation. May not be fully compliant. That word, compliant, hit me like a slap. It wasn't how people talked about coworkers or scientists. It sounded clinical, controlling. Underneath the memo was a handwritten page from my dad. A personal note, maybe meant for himself, maybe for me. If anything happens, it's because of what I found in Blackwell's archive. I shouldn't have looked, but once I did, I couldn't walk away. I think they're watching me now. The man in the green sedan is always there when I leave the house. If they find out I've copied the files. The sentence trailed off. My head was spinning. I leaned back against the workbench, trying to make sense of it all. Who was they? What files? And what kind of archive could be so dangerous that someone would disappear over it? There were newspaper clippings too, all from around 1978. Most were small articles. People reported missing. Accidents. Unexplained deaths. I scanned the names. None meant anything to me, until I found one that did. Local physicist dies in apparent gas leak. Dr. Marcus Ellis, my father's former colleague. I remembered the name from one of Mom's old stories. He and Dad had worked together before Dad moved into government research. That's how she'd always put it. Vague and final. The article said Marcus had been working on energy containment technology for a private contractor. No foul play suspected. I looked at the date, June 20, 1978. One day after my father vanished. Coincidence? Maybe. But something about the timing, and the other clippings, made my skin crawl. At the bottom of the green folder was a map. Old and brittle. There was an X marked deep in a wooded area, about 40 miles north of our town. Scribbled beside it were the words, archive access? Test site? And beneath that, one final note. If I don't come back, someone needs to know. Someone has to finish what I couldn't. I sat there a long time, the folder in my lap, flashlight flickering as its battery wore down. My mind raced through possibilities: government conspiracy? Military testing? Cold War paranoia? But none of it felt like fantasy. Not anymore. This wasn't some tinfoil theory or ghost story. This was my father, my family, my blood. He left this for a reason. And I had just opened the first door. The next morning, I packed a thermos of coffee, a flashlight, a notebook, and the green folder. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not that there was anyone to tell. I'd taken a few weeks off work under the pretense of settling my mother's estate. But the truth was, I couldn't think about anything else now. The coordinates on the map led to a forest preserve I barely remembered. As a kid, we'd driven past it once or twice on the way to Lake Winton, but I'd never been inside. It wasn't the kind of place people went for a casual hike. Overgrown, barely maintained, and too far off the main road to be convenient. I pulled onto a gravel trail and parked the car just short of a rusted gate chained shut. From there, I went on foot. The woods were dense and quiet, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. Not peaceful, but watching. I followed the faded path from the map, keeping the old paper folded in my jacket pocket, checking it against my GPS every so often. It was about a mile in when I saw it. A concrete structure. Low, windowless, half buried in the hillside. Covered in moss and vines, like the forest had tried to forget it. The door, steel, rusted, and barely hanging on, was already open. Inside, it was darker than I expected. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the silence. The air was thick and musty, with that abandoned industrial smell: metal, mildew, and time. I passed through a narrow hallway into a larger room, maybe once an office or control center. Paper littered the floor, broken file cabinets, a few overturned chairs. Someone had been here before me, clearly, but not recently. I moved slowly, checking every drawer and folder. Most were empty. Others were water-damaged beyond saving. But tucked inside a filing cabinet, behind a broken drawer panel, I found something intact. A binder. It had no cover or label, but inside were typed pages, logs, lab reports, testing protocols. Many were stamped with a symbol I didn't recognize. A triangle inside a circle, with 3 letters beneath it. BRG. Blackwell Research Group. The same name from the photo with my father. The reports weren't easy to understand. Pages of terminology and references to containment protocols, anomalous decay signatures, and thermal events. But a few things stood out. One report mentioned volunteer exposure. Another listed Subject 7, Marcus Ellis, and referenced an uncontrolled reaction. The language was clinical but horrifying. Failure to achieve thermal neutralization. Subject disintegration noted. Containment breach under review. I sat down on the cold floor, trying to wrap my head around it. Disintegration? Reactions? This wasn't just physics or energy research. This was something else entirely. What were they working on? And why was my father documenting it in secret? Near the back of the binder was a single page, handwritten. Whatever Blackwell was testing, it wasn't stable. I think Marcus knew. They told us it was clean energy. Controlled fusion. But the math didn't add up. Marcus wanted to shut it down. He said the last test nearly tore a hole through the core wall. They silenced him. I'm next. There was a date at the top, June 19, 1978. The day before my father disappeared. I put the binder in my backpack and kept searching. In another room, deeper in the structure, I found what looked like a server rack, dusty, dead, long since unpowered. Next to it, a bank of reel-to-reel tapes, labeled only by number. I didn't have the equipment to play them. But I took 2 reels with me anyway, along with a box of what looked like backup drives. On my way out, I noticed something carved into the concrete wall near the exit. At first I thought it was graffiti, but no, it was a name. Adam. Scratched deep into the surface. As if someone had done it with a knife. Or a key. My name. I stood frozen for a long moment. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Was this meant for me? Had he been here, right here, before he vanished? Back in the car, I sat for nearly 20 minutes with the engine off, the forest pressing in around me like a closed fist. I didn't know where this was going yet. But I knew I had crossed a line now, from curiosity into something else. My father had left a trail, and I was following it. But someone else had been here too. And I was starting to feel like I wasn't supposed to find any of this. The next step was to find someone who had worked with my father. Someone who might still be alive, and willing to talk. I started with Dr. Marcus Ellis, the man from the newspaper clipping. According to public records, he'd been declared dead in a gas leak accident in 1978. But I couldn't find a death certificate. No obituary. No grave. I searched local records, libraries, and eventually reached out to the Historical Society in Brantford, where Blackwell Research Group had once operated. A helpful archivist named Jenna told me the company had gone ghost in the early 80s. Packed up overnight, she said. Left half their equipment behind. Government came in a week later and sealed the property. No public access. I asked if she knew any former employees. She hesitated. Then said, "You might want to talk to a guy named Robert Haynes. He used to work logistics for them. Retired now. Lives near New Haven." I drove out to his address the next morning. A quiet neighborhood of old brick homes and faded porches. The kind of place where time moved slower. I found his house easily. Weathered siding, wind chimes on the porch, and a pair of binoculars resting on the window ledge. A man in his late 70s opened the door, wearing a flannel shirt and a cautious look. "Robert Haynes?" I asked. "Depends who's asking." I told him who I was. Gave him my father's name. Watched his face change, not in shock but in recognition. "Jesus," he muttered. "I figured someone would come one day." He let me in. His living room was quiet, warm, filled with books and bird figurines. No TV, just a record player spinning soft jazz. He offered me tea, then sat across from me in a chair that looked older than both of us. "I knew your father," he said finally. "Not well, but enough." I showed him the green file, the photo, even the binder I'd taken from the facility. He looked through them slowly, carefully, nodding to himself. "We all thought he was paranoid," he said. "Until he vanished." "What was Blackwell?" I asked. "Really?" Robert looked out the window, then back at me. "We were told it was clean energy research," he said. "New reactors. Safer nuclear. Fusion tech. But a few of the engineers started whispering about other things. Radiation that didn't behave the way it should, spikes in local magnetic fields. Dead birds around the testing sites." He paused. "Then Marcus died. They said gas leak. We didn't buy it." I asked about the symbol, the triangle inside a circle. Robert's lips tightened. "That wasn't Blackwell. That was Omega Division. They came in later. Black cars. No names. The kind of guys who don't ask for ID when they take your clipboard." "Military?" I asked. "Worse," he said. I showed him the carved name in the bunker wall. "My name. Adam." Robert stared at the photo I'd taken. His voice dropped. "He left that for you. He knew he wouldn't make it back." I felt something break in my chest. The weight of it hit me all over again. "Why didn't anyone talk?" I asked. "Why didn't this ever get out?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because people who talked stopped showing up to work. Or they got sick. Or they had accidents. The rest of us, we kept our mouths shut. I figured I was too small to matter. But your dad? He wouldn't play along. He was smart, too smart. And he cared." Robert got up and walked over to a cabinet. From the bottom drawer, he pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to me. "Never thought I'd give this to anyone," he said. "But it's yours now." Inside were more documents. Copies of internal memos. Letters from my father. One caught my eye immediately. "If anything happens to me, give this to Adam. One day he'll come looking." The date on the letter, June 15, 1978. 4 days before he disappeared. I looked up at Robert. He seemed tired now, like a man unburdened and suddenly aged by it. "You need to be careful," he said. "They buried this for a reason. And they might still be watching." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the motel room with the lights off. The documents spread out across the bed like pieces of a broken map. I could feel the pieces shifting, connecting, but something was still missing. The tapes. The ones I'd taken from the Blackwell facility. I needed to find a way to play them. And I had a feeling what they contained might be the final key to everything my father tried to tell me. Finding a reel-to-reel player in 2025 isn't easy. I called local libraries, music shops, even a film school upstate. Most places either laughed or suggested eBay. But on the third day, I got a call back from a man named Dennis, who ran a vintage electronics repair shop just outside of Hartford. "I've got a working TIAC 3300, he said. "Still takes 1/4-inch tape. What do you need it for?" I lied and said it was for a school project. He charged me $50 to use the machine in store. I brought the tape in a sealed bag and sat across from him in the back room while he threaded it onto the player like an ancient ritual. The machine hummed, clicked, and came to life with a faint crackle through the speakers. For a few seconds, nothing. Then, my father's voice. Clear, uneasy, alive. "If you're listening to this, then I've already failed to disappear quietly." Dennis gave me a quick glance. I nodded that it was okay. "My name is David Langford. I worked at Blackwell Research Group from 1971 to 1978. What we were doing wasn't just energy testing. It was weaponization. Not in the traditional sense, not bombs, not reactors. We were looking at sub-material decay. Fields that could destabilize mass itself." He paused. You could hear papers rustling, maybe a glass clinking. "The last tests went wrong. Subject 7, Marcus, didn't survive. I don't think it was an accident. They wanted to push the boundary. They pushed too far." There was a long silence. Then he spoke again, his voice lower. "We made something that shouldn't exist. We tore open something, not a hole, exactly. A pressure. A fold. It wasn't empty on the other side. I don't know how to explain it without sounding insane. I think they saw us. I felt the hair on my arms rise. The Omega Division came in 2 days later. They cleaned up, took everything. They left just enough to keep the project officially buried, plausible deniability. But I kept some records. And I'm leaving them for my son. Adam, if you hear this, I'm sorry. I couldn't tell your mother. I couldn't tell anyone. The tape clicked once, like a change in track, and continued. They'll come for the data. They might already be watching. But someone needs to know. Someone needs to say it out loud. We touched something that was never meant for us. And now it's listening. If you go back to the site, look under the server rack. There's a lockbox. You'll need the code 611-9. Then silence. Then the hiss of empty tape. I sat frozen. Dennis finally spoke. You okay? I nodded slowly. I left with the reel, paid in cash, and drove straight back to the site. This time I brought tools, gloves, and a crowbar. I didn't stop to think. I didn't want to lose the nerve. It took me 3 hours to move the rack and find the floor panel. Beneath it, just as he said, was a steel lockbox. I entered the code, 6119. It opened. Inside were photos, diagrams, a portable hard drive sealed in anti-static wrap, and another note, handwritten. Adam, if you found this, you have a choice. Burn it, walk away, pretend none of this ever happened, or finish what I couldn't. But if you choose the second path, there's no going back. I stood there for a long time. Birdsong in the distance, wind rustling through the trees. And in my hands, a decision. I didn't burn it. Epilogue. It's been 3 months. I've moved to a small town under a different name. No phone, no internet. I only leave the cabin to get food or check mail from a P.O. box I set up in another county. I've copied the files 3 times. One drive I sent to a journalist. Another to a man Robert Haynes trusted in D.C. The third I keep with me, in case everything else fails. I don't know what they'll do, or if anyone will believe it, but the truth is out there now. And if they come for me, I'll be ready. Because my father didn't disappear. He sacrificed himself to protect the truth. And now it's mine to carry.